Thank you. My task is really to focus in on some of the transition pieces as you go from one job to another. And I'd like to challenge you as you're thinking about all the talks you've been hearing so far, and mine as well, put yourself in different shoes, because each one of us has been a mentor and a mentee. And there are great things and mistakes made on all sides, as Clinton said. So I think you'll learn a lot about this if you think about it from sort of all the different angles. And I want to focus in really on the transitions that happen going from one position to another. It can be as a graduate student to a postdoc, or as a lot of this focus will be from a postdoc to a faculty position or other more advanced position beyond the postdoc. But many of the things are the same. So if you're looking for a new position, you really only have three career options. You can find a position that directly relates to your current field. You just slide right into something you know really well, or something maybe that builds more on the knowledge and skills you've already got, but you're really moving off base a little bit. And finally, something completely different. All of those are viable options, but you have to prepare for them a little bit differently. And I view them very differently. This is where I reveal even more loudly than I did at the beginning of the talk my GI physiology heritage, because when I think of finding a position which directly relates to your current field, I think of stem cells. You start off with the knowledge that you have, but it is never the place that you actually end up. It's just a beginning place because you cannot clone yourself as your previous mentor. You must move off that mark to become something different. So you're going to keep advancing, and much like a stem cell that in the small intestine will start down at the base of that gland and will migrate its way all the way up, differentiating and becoming something even more spectacular. You're going to advance, you're going to change, you're going to find yourself a niche, and you're going to differentiate from others. So it is a natural progression, but you really start off at the home base of knowing what you know and moving forward from there. In contrast, if you want to branch out, I think of fractals, because this is more building on an established pattern of branch points. You can still recognize a fractal, whether you get close in or you're far away, but it really is all about pattern recognition. And this is a place where you're building on the knowledge and skills you have, but you may not be applying them directly. They're really solid in the background for what you want to do in your career next. Putting together two fields that you know, making things a connection that maybe others don't have, but it's two very special techniques, or not techniques, two knowledge bases you own. So you're building on patterns you know work, you're recognizing new patterns, and a bit of mixing the familiar and unfamiliar, but really staying in some ways close to home. And these patterns don't always come in one pattern. You find them all throughout nature, in fact, in fractals. And you're just trying to grow a complementary skill set. But as you go along, instead of differentiating, I think of this as you're building out, and then you're sort of trimming back the things you don't need. So it's a chance to build on what you know, putting connections together by merging a couple of different disciplines. The third theory of how to find a job is doing something completely different, and I think this relates to chaos theory. Chaos theory is not random. Chaos theory starts like anything else does from a starting set of conditions. It's just much, much, much harder to predict where you get in the end point because there are a series of branches that appear random at the time. Serendipity makes up a lot of our careers. This is where serendipity sort of rules. And so in this case, as it says at the end of the top sentence, the top paragraph, even though chaotic systems are deterministic, their future behavior is fully determined, their initial conditions set it, there are no random elements involved. So in this case, you're going to come up with something that's very unique. You're going to be challenging your synapses because this really takes a broader set of connections than what you would have otherwise, and you get things that are unexpected. It can be very exciting. But if this is the most going out on a limb that you will have in terms of a career search. So now let's try and put this in perspective of what you've got. Because if you're getting ready for a new position, and in particular I've lined this one up thinking about moving on from a postdoc into something else, you've got to know the area you want to focus in. You've got to be able to independently formulate ideas, questions, and design experiments that can help address them. And you've got to be pretty confident and comfortable that you could reestablish whatever you've already done if you just picked it up and you got placed down on the moon with all the equipment. You could set it all up, you could work with the concepts, you could get the ideas to go. And you're also actively reading about multiple research areas, and you know how to transition to a new area of research based on your reading. So in my mind, this is how your mindset should be, the intellectual preparation that you need as a foundation to step up to the next position. but I think you also need practical preparation. So you've got to have that CV, and Brian must have had a fabulous one to go into the Pfizer website, and he was plucked out of the constellation of applications. That's who you want to be. You want to be the person that has a record of accomplishment that stands out. You've also got to be able to talk knowledgeably about what you have done, defending your work and your goals and your rationales. You've got to be able to multitask, or at least be able to switch between tasks fairly efficiently and get through a series of things, because more is going to be on your plate in the next job. And you, as others have talked about, you need a network of references who know you well. If you come out of the web lab, that's assured. But you may have to work at that a little bit yourself. So you should need to know the major scientists who work in your focus area, and they know you. Now, there's a consequence of this logic, that if you don't want to work in the focus area where you are known, where you've got the knowledge base, and you really want to go for something very different or now pull in some other aspect of training that you know, into your career and into the questions you want to ask, that is not part of your training, you may not yet be ready, especially for a faculty position where the pressure lands on you right away to be productive and to know your field and build on your field. You get to be the pro immediately as you walk in the door. So if, in particular for an academic job, you've got to be ready to drive your own projects and manage people. Managing people is a really strange skill that no one gets trained for. We do it with more or less natural talent, or more, sometimes less. So it's part of the job. You can articulate your goals, describing an area where you can make unique contributions. Why should someone hire you? What do you bring to put on the table that no one else does? Everyone can answer that question. You just need to consciously think about it. In the case of an academic job, you want to get involved in teaching and probably have some experience with it. If you don't feel like you've got enough experience in that, or haven't really exposed yourself enough to it to know, think about whether you're ready to take that piece on. In the case of academia, but maybe not at Pfizer, you feel ready to write grants or have written some already. Good experience. It helps frame your ideas. Writing the grant the first time, everyone finds a valuable experience. Revising the grant, not so popular. And again, that multitasking coming up. You're going to have teaching, research, administration, your colleagues and your students and your staff are all going to need to talk to you, and you have to be ready to work with all of them and help them all. So now you've got to get ready for your departure. This is the interface part. Start early. You heard a lot of the things that are here on the Clint's discussion about what to do as you're stepping into a position. That's the perfect time to have this discussion, but if you haven't had it, you'd better have it as you're thinking about leaving, because they've got people need to know that you've been working with or for the goals for the next position. How much research do you want? How much teaching do you want? You've got to discuss your strategy for job hunting. You've got to discuss who the letters of reference are going to come from. Let people know ahead of time. Discuss the management of overlapping goals between the mentor and the parting mentee. So you may want to go into an area that is overlapping where you currently are. That can get a little sticky. Good to have that conversation early. And you've got to wrap up your current project. If you've done a great job, you'll have some loose hanging ends, some wonderful ideas, some sterling results that you can't finish up by the time you actually get out of the lab. How's that going to happen? And then there may be some proprietary resources, that reagent, the drug that the chemist down the hall made, the mouse that you made that actually is still your mentor's mouse. How are you going to get that? These are all good things to discuss, but when I hear about these, I always start feeling a little uncomfortable because the conversation can get icky on some of these. They are touchy subjects because it is the time where your child is leaving home or you are the child leaving home. If you have ever been through that, it is something where it is a wonderful occasion and it's a hard occasion. So you just need to work through it. It becomes harder if things have not gone perfectly smoothly. If you've gotten into an area where maybe things haven't gone quite as smoothly, this can get really tricky, because this is where you hit the real crux point. So I do want to now take a segue into talking about, as you're prepping for your departure, thinking about whether you have an issue. If so, you are not alone. This is not unusual. This is a high-stress environment. People are working hard. Everyone's trying to push forward in an ideal environment. Everybody's working really hard to try and get to an end point. As Clinton said, there are some times where labs can be quite competitive in terms of the way an environment is. That can be very healthy, but it can also get unhealthy. So just to think about some of the reasons of why maybe things have not gone quite right. A mismatch of skills or expectations among the team members. People are expecting something that they're not getting. Progress can be slow. Some projects are just naturally slow. Sometimes bad choices are made and things just go slower. It can be a weak project where you just don't feel like it's really showing you that pizzazz that you want in your career. Common to have a lack of cultural competence to understand different points of view or approach to problems. Lack of communication. A rough one is breaking of trust in a team. And finally, private life changes. If somebody wants to start a family or someone has a health issue, these are things that just come up. It's part of life, but it does put additional stress on things. So these are all things that you have to look at either as a mentor or as a mentee and really play fair. And as you come up with one of these deficits, they can get increasingly difficult. Something that's recognized early falls into the no one's perfect, we can deal with this strategy. And I think everyone should take that attitude at the very beginning. Is just something, you've just realized something just came up. Everyone has a chance to adjust and compensate. Really, it's just, oh my gosh, this just happened, we've got to fix this. You can realign a project to suit everyone better and invest both time and money on both sides of the mentor-mentee relationship to make sure that this is going to go better. It's always good to meet regularly and talk frankly about the challenges. The more people understand them, the better off you'll be. Everyone should be working hard and smart to restore enthusiasm and optimism. You want to see that people are making an earnest attempt to meet in the middle. And it's best to share and review things in writing so no one forgets or misunderstands. We all have selective hearing loss. There are things that you think the message has come out clearly and only a third of it actually reached the ears. It just happens. So writing is a really good thing. It tends to minimize confusion. This is not to say you want everything only done in writing, because email is also not a good conversational medium. It is a great verification medium. If there have been consistent concerns, things are now starting to stretch on and the repair work hasn't gone as you wish, tensions can rise a little bit. So you may need to add some more ways of compensating this kind of situation to deal with concerns. And maybe the communication is getting a little strained. Sometimes it helps to try and bridge that gap with mediators, alternative mentors, just so that there's somebody in the middle to talk to as well as that direct mentor-mentee relationship. And an outside advice is really helpful. You may be starting to think it's time to salvage what you can from the investment you've made. The papers may need to be a little bit smaller. You may want to lower your ambitions. It may not be that cell paper. It may be something a little bit more modest. So I think just trying to be realistic about it so that you can show obvious ability to move forward is really good. The place where it gets really tough is when a deficit becomes a centerpiece of the relationship. This is where performance of everybody involved is degrading and communication, every time you talk between you, is problematic. This is an ugly place to be. No one wants to be here. And I think it's important to remember that no one wants to be here, because that's the time that you can actually have the discussion. Because if everyone's playing fair honestly on that emotional level and trying to pull it out of the emotional level, everyone will do better. You've got to keep it professional, calm, fair, and constructive conversations. Get advice on how to handle situations. Develop an exit strategy, because that's probably now when you need to think about that and get into a timeline that meets everybody's needs. When you have a compromised position like this, it might slow down your trajectory. It doesn't have to change it. But if you are in a compromised position where you're just not able to move forward within the group, it might mean you should rethink your goals, because you may have to take a smaller step out rather than that big step where you were hoping to go and work at MIT. Yeah, maybe pull it back a notch and think about alternatives in the middle to get a different kind of training. Now, in the panel discussion, I think there are lots of secondary questions in specific situations about how to do this, and I think we'll just leave that for the panel discussion. But if I can get off this very negative feeling piece of this talk and just come back to the other side with a roadmap to try and avoid these potholes, Clarify expectations of how time is going to be invested. This comes back to a lot of what we heard from Clinton as well. I advise setting up regular meetings and expect, on both sides, robust and challenging discussion. Don't expect to just say yes and do what you're told. Come to meetings with talking points, data, ideas, questions. Be prepared on both sides of that conversation. Make it easy to get and give formative feedback. And finally, I think it's good advice to share one personal item every time you meet, because very often there can be a very businesslike interaction of people, but I think this is the best way to understand what people's goals are. If you're going to go out to that jazz club, if you're going to be taking the hip-hop dancing class, let people know about that, because that's just, it's life, right? And we all have a life to live. So with that, thank you.